Sure. I just want to say good morning and thank you so much for joining us for this amazing program to have the opportunity to hear from HAC and to hear from the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. No. And all about their mapping program. I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Laura, for that. And I want to run through a couple updates for everyone before we get started our main speakers for today. So if you just bear with me for me to share my screen. All right, so welcome to Zoomed In on Real Estate, always sponsored by the Cooperative Bank Cape Cod, and we appreciate their support of us doing this, and one of our most successful programs we've put together. So a couple things, our virtual CE schedule coming up through September is conducting open houses because September is Realty Safety Month. So how you develop a safety plan with open houses. On September 21st, Selling the Sun, how to list, market, and establish the value of a solar PV home for our online webinar as well. And then on September 28th, it's a 3-day course, Seller Representative Specialist designation. It does offer CE with it, so you feel free to sign up and knock out a lot of your CE that you need for renewal. But that is a 3-day course from 9 to noon, I think 3 days in a row, to get your Seller Representative Specialist designation. Those are all online virtual webinars, and then our in-person CE schedule through September is on September 22nd. We have zoning and building codes as a continuing education class in person at the CCR office, and also Title V. And so at noon, so 9 and noon those days will be our CE courses. We only have our CE courses, I want to let you know, through September, because we intend to launch an online platform in October on how you take online CE via Zoom, and also even for in person. So with that, as we're building that out and finishing that, we only have the CE through September. If you do need it in October and would like to take live Zoom or live in person, please, you can email education@ccr.com and find the dates so they can save the dates for you if you're really looking toward that, since we don't have them up as we get ready to launch this platform. Also in August or September 8th, Thursday, September 8th, we have our Realtor Social out in Provincetown at Provincetown Brewing Company, sponsored by Siemens Bank. So I hope you take a time to join us out there in P-Town at 5 o'clock. So please take time for that. Also, if you haven't already, know that the Massachusetts Association of Realtors Conference this year is in September. I believe it's like 13th, 14th, 15th area in Falmouth at the Seacrest. So it's a quick little trip over there for you guys on the day trip to be part of the MAR conference. They have a great line of speakers, and you can check it all out, marealtor.com. And find out all about the upcoming MAR conference at the Seacrest in Falmouth. And then also on August 22nd, MAR has put together a great webinar called A New Standard for Measuring Single-Family Properties. It's all about the ANSI method that Fannie Mae has required appraisers to use now. A lot of appraisers did use it, but some didn't. So just if you're interested in learning about gross living area versus finished square footage and room counts and how it affects everything, you can check in with this webinar on August 22nd at 2 o'clock, all about the new GLA and ANSI and the new way to measure houses. So MLS training's coming up. We have Flex MLS runs a coffee break, and they'll teach you how to run a CMA in 3 minutes within Flex MLS. That is obviously coming up on August 24th at 3 o'clock. And then the next day at 3 o'clock is one of our quick tips that our staff teaches to keep the violation emails out of your inbox. So kind of goes over the most highly violations of listing entry and kind of oversees that to talk to you about the best tips to stay current and in compliance. And then hope you've seen this on one of our most requested features. For years you've been able to text message out of the app listings to clients in your phone. This is a new feature that allows you to text from the desktop. I'll be honest, it's taken a long time because if FPS actually has to pay per text, but they've been able to bulk buy it and everything else as some of the new technologies like Twilio and some of that stuff has come on to allow them to do this. But you can text now out of the FlexMLS desktop. It's in the same spot where you go to share on where you go to email it or grab the permalink, but it's the text right there that you can do. So I hope you take advantage of that. Let us know how that works as well for you. And then we'll talk a little bit about one more thing to mention about MLS policy before we move on is starting September 5th, we are enforcing, we have been enforcing, but we have not been making it a violation to have the lead paint form. If the property is subject to the lead paint disclosure, it will be required to have it listing input. It has been required, but we are now going to enforce it. And the way we enforce it is that you will not be able to enter a property without uploading it. It'll be like the listing agreement where the property will not go live without lead paint form or the exemption or an MLS exemption form if your client does not want it disseminated in MLS, even though that does not excuse them from the legal liability of disseminating it. And remember, this is because we think everything to make an offer should be in the MLS, and you need to present lead paint before you accept an offer. So should have everything in there for that buyer client. So if you have any questions, please contact our MLS staff on that as well. Couple quick market facts as we've put out the reports for July. So this is for July of 2022. Our inventory is our closed sales, as we've seen all year, is 20.6% down in July from July of last year. Overall, that tracks right there with what we're seeing overall in the whole market, which is through July, it was 20% down in closed sales. So we're definitely seeing that. However, one number to really look at is when you look at, don't compare closed sales to 2020 or 2021, look back at 2019 and 2018, and we're tracking right there. So we're pretty much back to where the market of activity was prior to the pandemic. So yeah, that's important to know there. However, the things that are not where they are prior to the pandemic, or median sales price is obviously way up and continues to rise. I mean, condos now in July we're up at 500,000. Single family homes were up at 686,000. That's just for that snapshot in July. We'll go year over year in a second. But once again, even up from last July, showing that prices are still up, even though sales are down. Single family homes, what we're seeing now in inventory is that we're seeing that leveling of homes for sale from last year. Now, you want to go back to 19 and 18, we're still like 75% down from where we were then. But we are seeing more of a leveling where we're not seeing year over year declines. Because if you try to look at it, we were really low in January, February, you always have the seasonal adjustability. So trying to adjust for seasonal, it's better to look year over year. And we're finally seeing close to that flatness on the single family home side in inventory. However, we're still down in new listings, right? So like while sales are dropped to where they were in 08, 18, 19, prices, inventory, and new listings are still well down from what we were seeing then. So it is still a mismatch of things. So that was for July. We saw 390 new houses for sale. What I talked about last month, what I think is what y'all are feeling and where you can track what you're feeling in the marketplace is months of supply of inventory. So, right, we got down in January, February when we still are having a lot of sales to 0.8 months of inventory on the market. We are now at 1.9, which is, you can see, the highest we've been at in months of inventory. What months of inventory calculates is the amount of pending sales and the amount of inventory and how long it would take to sell everything. So that's where you're feeling that lower demand and kind of that flattening of inventory. So you're seeing that there. And 1.9 months is the highest we've seen in the last 12 months, but let's not get carried away. Like you look in 2020, we were up at 3.2, and that was way down. 19 and 18, we were in that 5 to 6 month category. So still have, if you compare back to pre-pandemic, we still have a long way to go to get to that month supply of inventory we were at. But so I just want to say, and also if you've noticed too on the right, as condo sales have kind of picked up, or single family homes have declined more in demand, the months of inventory of condos have actually gone lower in the last couple of months than on single family homes. So that's an interesting thing to be looking at as people have been going more toward the condos, seems like lately. All right, well, that is my presentation for today, talking about what kind of the market's doing. I want to introduce our guests for today to talk about the project they recently completed and how you guys can kind of benefit from it, but also just when you hear things out there in person as well. So I want to introduce David Quinn from the Housing Assistance Corporation of Cape Cod, and Don Kieran from the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, for a project they've been working on, trying to, and David's going to talk more about probably this, but trying to say, okay, we need to stop this fight between the environmental community and the housing community when properties come up for, when major parcels come up for sale, and how can we look at data to determine, the best interest of the parcel, so that the land trusts aren't competing against housing projects and bidding up land, and how we can kind of look at this. So David, you want to take it away from here?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that introduction. Just going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, can you all see my screen? Okay, so yeah, thank you, everybody. My name is David Quinn. I'm the Director of Housing Development for Housing Assistance Corporation. And I'm here with Don Kieran from the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. Don can't be on video, but he's here in voice, so you'll hear from him in a moment. So we're here today to talk about a joint project that Housing Assistance Corporation and the Association to Preserve Cape Cod have been working on over the past 2 years. And this was funded through a grant from Barnstable County Economic Development Council, the license plate program through the Cape Cod Commission. And the goal of this project was to address what I think we all understand is, multiple important issues on Cape Cod, or two important issues on Cape Cod, one being the severe shortage of year-round housing. Brian just ran through some numbers, 500,000 median sale price for a condo. I mean, that's really out of reach for most year-round, residents of Cape Cod. And we know that we need to add more housing supply to address that issue. At the same time, we live on a small sandy peninsula. There's limited land left over. There's important natural resources. There's water quality issues. There's nutrient loading in our bays. So there's some serious environmental problems as well. And so this project was really born out of the idea that we need to tackle both of these issues together, which is why our two organizations, HAC, Housing Agency, and APCC, Conservation Agency, came together. We don't think we're really going to get very far by fighting over these issues and the remaining pieces of land on Cape Cod, or where to develop and where not to develop. We recognize that we need to come together and kind of create this joint vision of what our future land use looks like on Cape Cod. And so that is what this project was. Again, we started about 2 years ago when we received this grant, and we're going to go through in detail what criteria we used to figure out, to put on the maps, some of the interesting discussions we had. But the end result has been a map that we just released earlier this summer, that shows all of Cape Cod, as well as town by town maps. And it identifies areas that are most important to protect, so to not develop on. And those areas are shown in various shades of green, which we'll go into. You can see a sort of a preview of the map. And then in purple, various shades of purple, are areas that we identified as having characteristics that would be beneficial for housing, or would be suitable for housing in those areas. There's a lot more sort of nuance to the maps that we'll go into, and when we get online and play around with the online map, you'll see that. But that's the general idea, is that we don't want to be fighting over these remaining parcels of land. We want to kind of create a joint vision for what land use should be on Cape Cod. And in general, these maps are meant to be an educational and planning tool for the towns, and hopefully for realtors, as the starting point, really to start the discussion about where we should be focusing our development efforts and our conservation efforts on Cape Cod. So that's sort of the very high level overview. I'm going to turn it over to Don if he has anything more to add sort of at the high level before we dive into the process.
Thanks, Dave. Don Kieran with the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. I'm Assistant Director there. And I think Dave covered quite a bit of it. But one of the messages that APCC wants to send home with this is that we really need to have a sea change in how we think about the future of Cape Cod as far as protecting our natural resources and deciding where and how we're going to grow. And we haven't, if you check with the Cape Cod Commission, they've estimated that we have something like 13 or 14% of land left on Cape Cod that is either that is unprotected and undeveloped. And if we're going to find the appropriate areas for affordable housing while also protecting our natural resources, we really need to again rethink how we go about doing this in the future. So that's the whole point of the Grow Smart Cape Cod logo that we have attached to our website and to this program. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about this and get into some of the details as we go forward. So I think am I pushing it back to you, Dave, or what's the next slide?
Yep. So
yeah,
turning it back over to me. So first, I'm going to talk about what our process was for these maps and to give you a sense of the thinking that we went through in coming up with these different areas on the maps. The very first thing we did 2 years ago was we formed an advisory committee. I think most people agree with the goals of the map and the vision of the map, but we really wanted to have a solid advisory committee that was going to give us input on what are the actual things that we're going to consider when we're looking at where are the areas that are most suitable for housing, what are the actual most important resources to protect. So we went out and we reached out to town planners, to developers, to members of conservation trusts, got people who are experts from a variety of different areas in land use on Cape Cod, and formed an advisory committee. And they really formed the basis of the input throughout the process for creating these maps. And the very first thing we did was we started with determining the natural resource layers first. So we said, okay, what are the areas that have the most important habitats or value for protecting water quality that we need to really prevent from future development? So those were the layers that we laid down on the maps first as the starting point. Once we had that, we then looked at the other the remaining areas on the map and had to figure out how do we start thinking about what are the different features of areas that would be conducive to housing. So we'll get into this in a little more detail, but we looked at things like wastewater and existing infrastructure and surrounding development patterns, and tried to figure out if the goal is to add more housing without creating more suburban sprawl, areas that are appropriate for increasing density in a way that fits Cape Cod's character. What are the things that we need to be looking for to focus our efforts? So we'll go through in detail what those criteria are. And I think what was great about these maps is that we created that criteria, and then we kind of let the criteria speak for themselves. So we didn't do a lot of manipulation of the maps other than a ground truthing process to go out to each town and make sure that we weren't missing anything or had any areas mapped incorrectly. But we really let the criteria that we came up with speak for itself, and applied it across the board, across all Cape Cod towns, so that when you see these maps and you have questions about why exactly did something score the way it did, it's all based on a very uniform, it's an agnostic criteria that looks at what's actually happening on the ground and scores it in that way. And then at the end, we converted this to an online interactive map, which we will show you and play around with. That that is live. It's at growsmartcapecod.org, and it's available for all of you to use and play around with whenever you want. So I think I'm going to turn it over back to Don, who's going to start. As I mentioned, the first thing we did was lay down the priority natural resource areas on the map. So he's going to go through and explain what that actually entailed.
Again, Dave. And in determining the priority natural resource areas, we wanted to make sure that we had some consistency and some defensibility in those areas that we are mapping and what we decided to map. So we turned to the Cape Cod Regional Policy Plan, the most recent iteration of it, which divides the Cape into different types of land uses, land areas that the regional policy plan calls place types. And we looked at specifically the place type, which the regional policy plan calls natural areas, which is the highest level of environmentally sensitive lands and resources on the Cape. And so we use that as our standard. It's already a regionally established configuration of those land uses. So there is that consistency across the region. And in developing those that criteria for the regional policy plan, the Cape Cod Commission modeled most of that on state standards for the highest level of environmental integrity and environmental significance for the different types of land uses. So we settled on that. It's very defensible. It's very consistent, and it makes sense for Cape Cod. So the breakdown, as you can see on the screen here, and we'll show you some examples when we get to looking at the actual map. But the priority natural resource protection areas are the DEP approved wellhead protection areas. Those are public drinking water supplies, and are what, for simplicity on the map, the green square that you see there, the combined natural landscapes, those are areas that are essentially unprotected and still at risk. And for ease in reading the map, we combine 4 different types of what are, I guess you could lump them into the habitat category. It's the state's Biomap 2 core habitats, the Biomap 2 critical natural landscapes, and the state's natural heritage and endangered species programs, priority habitats for rare species, and estimated habitats for rare species. So because of the size of the map and just make it a little bit easier to look at with all the different layers, we put all of those 4 categories of habitats and critical landscapes together into that green color. Next one is protected open space, permanently protected open space, which is town-owned or owned by land trust, or it could be owned by the state or the federal government. Those are all lumped together as permanently protected open space. Then the FEMA flood zones, those areas that are prone to flooding, again, following the regional policy plan criteria, which they're included in the natural areas place type for Cape Cod. And then certified vernal pools and a minimum 350-foot buffer around those vernal pools, and wetlands. So any other type of wetland, salt marsh, ponds, etc. Wetlands and 100-foot buffer around those wetlands. So those are the criteria for the different layers for the priority natural resource areas for our mapping project. Next slide, Dave, thanks. And some examples that we have here on the Cape. I'm sure we all recognize them, but you know, our critical landscapes, things like our vernal pools that you see in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, rather. our ponds, our freshwater ponds, and our forested lands, which are important for habitat protection, for groundwater recharge, for watershed protection, and for recreational uses. Next slide, please. And the fact is that we haven't done a good job of protecting our natural resources on the Cape so far. We've our past and our current land use policies and our development patterns have significantly impacted the Cape's natural resources. We've sprawled across the landscape and fragmented important habitat areas. Next slide, Dave. And our development patterns have impacted our water resources as well. And that's been made worse, of course, by our lack of wastewater infrastructure in most locations on the Cape. Nutrients from wastewater and fertilizers have impaired our marine embayments. And those same nutrient sources have also impacted our freshwater ponds. And we're seeing, for example, increased occurrences of toxic cyanobacteria blooms in our freshwater ponds across the Cape. Our drinking water supplies haven't escaped, in some instances, the impacts of our past development patterns and our lack of wastewater infrastructure. We've seen, in some instances, in public wells and certainly in private wells, we've seen increased nitrate levels from wastewater. And other contaminants have started to show up. One that you see a lot in the news lately is PFAS, which has actually closed some public wells and some towns across the Cape. Next slide, please, Dave. So, as we mentioned earlier, in making the maps, and because of the trying to reverse course on some of the development patterns that we've had in the past, we agreed to set down the remaining natural resource areas first. And in doing so, that we would exclude consideration of potential housing within those natural resource areas. The exception are, and you can see an example here in the Mid-Cape portion of the map. You can see the various priority natural resource areas that I mentioned before, the critical natural landscapes, the dark green, the protected open space, or the lighter color green. The diagonal blue lines are the wellhead protection areas, our drinking water supply areas. The brown is the FEMA flood zone. So the exception to this is we did not put down the wetlands and wetland buffers and the vernal pool buffers in this initial layer. Those layers were added later so that they didn't factor into the larger potential housing areas. So that, as Dave will explain, in a 30-acre area of housing, there could still be some portion of that has wetlands, and certainly you wouldn't want to develop within the wetland or the wetland buffer, but it shouldn't cancel out any potential housing priority areas within the rest of that study area. So you'll see examples later on when we show you the interactive map of how those wetland layers are applied. And I think at this point then I'm going to turn it back over to Dave, and he can talk to you about how the housing layers were applied.
Sure. So this map on the screen here is really the starting point for thinking about the housing layer. So as Don mentioned, we have laid down all of the green areas, various types of priority natural resource areas. The hash mark blue areas, those are wellhead protection districts. So those are areas that there could be housing in, but you really need to think about wastewater infrastructure in those areas. And then the brownish area is floodplains. And so for the housing criteria and thinking about where to build housing, we were looking really at the remaining gray spaces on the map. So just keep that in mind as we go to the next step. For housing criteria, our group decided, with input from our advisory committee meeting and a lot of other folks, decided to focus on 3 sort of major groupings of housing criteria that would indicate that an area was suitable for housing development. Number 1, and probably the most important, is wastewater infrastructure. So this is a real driver to allow housing development to occur at a density that, a village scale density, to not rely on septic systems. So it serves the dual purpose of allowing for more housing development where it's appropriate, but it also has a function of helping to prevent nutrients from getting into the groundwater. So it has both a housing impact and an environmental impact. So areas that have wastewater infrastructure or have plans in the near future to add wastewater infrastructure scored highly on our maps for potential for housing. We also looked at existing development patterns. So we looked at things like business activity, community amenities, transportation routes, whether there's existing multifamily development in the neighborhoods, bike paths, things like that. So we looked at sort of the existing development pattern already in place in an area. And then we also looked at future development potential. So areas that had vacant land that was town owned or vacant developable land that was not in a natural resource area, or underdeveloped commercial areas, even land that's already been developed, but maybe could be better suited for housing. So areas that were commercial, but could potentially be converted and rehabbed. A little more detail within each of those categories. Again, so this just shows you sort of our scoring system. What we did is we actually scored every single parcel on Cape Cod, and it was scored. You can see each of the categories, and the colors represent those buckets that I just mentioned. Wastewater infrastructure get the most points. A parcel gets the most points if it's on existing sewer. This shows the maximum points that each of these can get. Also got points if it had a sewer plan in the near future. So if towns have been doing a lot of planning for sewer, and if a town has a plan in place where it looks like wastewater infrastructure is going to be added in the next 10 years, either a phase 1 or phase 2 plan, we did give points for that with the understanding that it could be coming to that area soon. I mentioned all of the different existing development pattern criteria: community activity, business activity, whether it's in an already designated Cape Cod Commission activity center, bike paths, sidewalks, transportation routes, and existing multifamily housing. And those things scored at various levels that we worked through with the advisory committee. The idea being that each of the 3 major buckets got roughly could get the same total number of points. And then again, we looked, the last bucket was underdeveloped commercial, vacant town-owned, and vacant developable land. So we scored every single parcel. And after that, we decided that we didn't actually want to show a parcel by parcel map. That really wasn't the goal of the project, to sort of say this parcel yes, that parcel no. We wanted the map to show areas or neighborhoods and sort of the general conditions in that neighborhood, and whether it's an area that would be considered a priority for housing. So we grouped parcels into these hexagons, and when we laid these on the map, each hexagon represents 30 acres of land. And we scored them based on the average score of all the parcels in that 30-acre hexagon. And then we broke them into 3 groups. So we broke them into moderate priority housing, high priority housing, I should say 4 groups: moderate priority housing, high priority housing, potential for housing if there was a sewer in place in the future. So these were areas that scored highly for housing, but they're in a zone 2 wellhead protection district. So there's a water quality concern there, and really only focusing on those areas if there's a municipal wastewater system put in place. And then the 4th one would just be not priority. So it's not shown here, but the areas that we didn't score are areas that we're not showing as priority for housing, and those will show up on the map as white areas. Okay. And before we jump over to the actual interactive map, I think it's important to point out when you're looking at these maps, when we're talking about priority for housing, that can mean some very different things depending on where you are. So we have here is an illustration of a variety of different increased density housing types that was put together by Union Studio Architecture and Design out of Providence for the Cape Cod Commission. And these show a variety of housing types, from accessory dwelling units that could be, you know, a little in-law suite behind your house, all the way up to a larger apartment building. And when you look at the maps, you'll see that the maps really don't distinguish housing types based on the color. So that's really meant for the individual towns to think about, you know, an area that is appropriate for housing in a village center in Wellfleet might look very different than downtown Hyannis. On the maps, those are going to show up both as high priority for housing, but we also recognize that it doesn't, you know, the same types of housing might not go in everywhere. Really what the maps are trying to show is that within your community, these are the areas that you should start looking at to see what the existing development's like, and what maybe some opportunities for increased development within the constraints of, you know, your infrastructure and kind of what's appropriate within the context of your neighborhood. So we're not advocating for skyscrapers across the board or anything. It really is a context sensitive recommendation and meant to be an educational tool for communities thinking about their land use planning. So it could be a variety of different results. Okay, so I'm going to skip over to the interactive map. Exit out of this. So first, just to show you the landing page. So it's growsmartcapecod.org. It's live. You can go in and play around with this website. There's a whole bunch of different features and information on the various tabs. I'm going to skip that for now and go right to the map. So to get to the actual interactive map, you're just going to scroll down to the bottom and click on this, which will open up an interactive map in a new tab. And I think most people are pretty familiar with navigating around online maps, but just to give you a little lay of the land, when it first opens up, you're going to see the key on the left-hand side here that shows what all of the different colors and shapes mean. So we have our housing areas, moderate, high, potential for housing if sewered. I haven't turned that layer on yet, so you don't see it yet. A little bit of explanation, and then all of the natural resource areas that Don went through. And we also have the option to turn on and off vernal pools, wetlands, community activity centers, and town boundaries. And you can actually turn on and off those layers on this. If you go down to this layers tab here, this is where you can actually turn on and off things. So for example, if I wanted to zoom into an area, I'm just going to zoom into the Mid-Cape here, in the Hyannis area. You can see we have a lot of high priority housing in downtown Hyannis, which makes sense. There's some already protected. Light green is already protected open space, and the dark green represents at-risk natural resources that are high priority for protection. But that doesn't necessarily mean that every single parcel in these housing areas are going to be suitable for housing. And so the wetlands buffer, so if you turn that on, you can see where the wetlands are located. Click on vernal pools, you can see where those are located. So that just allows you, so, you know, if you were analyzing an area or a parcel and zooming in and trying to figure out what might be suitable on the site, those are some things you can turn on and off to see what's happening at a more localized level. Obviously, for any individual parcel that you're looking at for sale, for development, for protection purposes, environmental protection, you're still going to have to do due diligence on that parcel. So this map really is getting at sort of the high level general recommendations about what are the characteristics of that neighborhood, whether it's priority for housing or priority for natural resource protection. Other features of the map, let's see here. I'm going to turn off the wetlands because that kind of gets in the way a little bit. You can, you know, like many online maps, you can do a satellite image. I find that's helpful if you're zooming into a really specific area. You can zoom in and see what's going on, and then you can turn on and off the entire layer to see what's going on underneath that. You can search for an address. So if you have any address, you can search for it and zoom into it, and it'll bring you right to it. And then the other layer I mentioned that it starts turned off, but you can turn this on, is this, I guess it's a salmon color. And so what this represents is areas that scored pretty highly for housing priority when we did our analysis, but they're in areas that do not have wastewater infrastructure, and they're under a wellhead protection district, which is shown by this hash mark line. So these are areas that may have features that are really conducive to housing. So if I let's see if I turn this off so you can see under, this is an example of Station Ave in Yarmouth. It's got a pretty dense development pattern already. It's around a lot of businesses, bike path, but it doesn't have wastewater. So that's really telling you that there's potential there, but wastewater definitely is a consideration because of some water quality concerns. I'm going to zoom way back out now. Don, did you have any specific areas you wanted me to zoom in on from the natural resource side?
Let's see, natural resources. I guess my favorite, since I live there, is Brewster.
Okay.
You can zoom in on the west side of Brewster. And because it just, I'm not being particular, but it's because I'm more familiar with this area, and it does show a lot of the different examples of the natural resource layers. So you can turn on if you could, well, hang on for a second, don't turn on the wetlands, but you can see the large areas of essentially unprotected critical landscapes, priority habitat in the dark green. The zone 2s are in there. You can see vernal pools in there. If you can click on the wetland layer as well, please. So you can see that there are a lot of wetlands in that area, a lot of ponds, salt marshes, some streams, herring run. So that's a good example of an area that has all of those features. One thing I would add is that in the dark green, we do acknowledge in the critical natural landscapes that there is some development that has occurred in there. Certainly, it's not suggesting that the dark green is all undeveloped land, all untouched land, but it is all within mapped by the state, mapped critical landscapes, critical habitats. So those areas are still vulnerable to further development and further fragmentation of habitats and environmental sensitivity.
Okay, and I'm going to go back to the website here. As you're playing around with the map, if you come to areas and you have questions, you're certainly welcome to email us. But you can also find a lot of information about the maps and how to use the maps on the website itself. So if you go to this button up on the top here that says the maps and click on that, one thing is that brings you to a map of every single town that you can download. So if you really, I think this is more for various committees and trusts that they can actually have a printout version to bring with them to meetings, but we have a PDF available for every single town on the Cape that you can download and use. And then we also have a narrative that goes through everything we just talked about, and actually in a little bit more detail than we just talked about. So if you have questions about, what are our data sources, what exactly does all of this mean? It goes through our process and what the scoring system was and what it all means. I think for your work as realtors, important to know things that it doesn't include. We didn't look at land value at all. We didn't look at whether a parcel, like I said, it's not a parcel by parcel map. So in both the natural resource protection areas and the housing areas, there's some parcels that are fully built out and there are others that are vacant. So this map really doesn't tell you anything specifically about the value or what's happening on that parcel. And it also doesn't look at any kind of regulatory, zoning issues. So it doesn't tell you exactly what the zoning is in those areas. We've been talking to towns about using these maps as sort of the baseline to start their discussions about land use and potentially look at high priority housing areas and then then overlay their own zoning so they can use this to think about their zoning in the future. You know, where are areas that currently are maybe single family zoned, but have the potential to be upzoned to allow for some higher density where it's appropriate. So
Yeah,
those are
David, I think that's really important, because what I think Don talked about earlier, which is what I believe needs to happen, what you believe needs to happen, is we've made a lot of poor land use decisions over the last 20, 30, 40 years, and the ability to say, okay, if we actually had data around, very few zoning decisions were ever made based on data. And so be able to say, okay, we're not going to look at zoning because that's maybe flawed in thinking from a bias perspective when that was zoned for whatever reason, and look at it from a data standpoint.
exactly.
And also on this website, Dave, if you can click on the recommended actions, I think
Oh, that's right.
it's something very important, and it's not just recommended actions for towns, but it's for all the various stakeholders. It's for private land trusts, for affordable housing organizations, for realtors, for developers. But we would encourage you to go to this website and take a look at these actions, which we think are going to be driving home the idea that we really need to, again, rethink how we grow in the future and how we protect our natural resources. And so
these recommended actions are right up our alley on our public policy as well, for what we work on, because
Right.
we work with Association of Cape Cod and HAC daily on some of these issues.
Yeah, so I encourage you to take a look at those. We won't go through all the whole set and read them off, but if you could look at them on your spare time, that would be great. And start thinking about how it applies to what you do on a daily basis.
Does anyone have any questions for David or Don? You can put in the Q&A down there at the bottom as well. We can get to those as well as you guys kind of wrap up your talk around what you guys are doing here.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty good wrap up. I'll just close by saying I think the big takeaways should be that the current development pattern isn't really suiting either interest group well. The sprawling development pattern, it's not producing the housing we need. It's using up our natural resource areas quickly by having single family 1 acre zoning. And so what this map tries to show is that we really need to focus on village center density and away from sprawling development patterns, and then protect the areas that are most critical.
Yeah, and I think, one thing I want to stress too is realtors are often on the front line of parcels that go for sale, right? Like, you're usually the first contact someone makes. And so, be able to use this map as a tool to say, hey, this isn't what's been identified as a potential conservation area. Maybe I should go to the conservation land trust in the area first to see if they have interest, or hey, this isn't a housing area. I'm not going to waste my time on the conservation land trust. I'm going to spend my time calling some developers, calling, affordable housing, other kinds of people to think about building housing on this parcel. And so I think it's a good starting point tool for realtors who may get a call around a piece of land to start with.
Exactly.
I think we may have a question coming in as well. I think the question was, how are you tackling zoning issues town by town to get more density? And, I'll speak from mine and David's point of view is we have launched a new organization together with the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce called Housing and Protect Cape Cod. And we are actually in the process of finalizing a Housing Protect Cape Cod Summit on November 3rd, Thursday, November 3rd. So be on the lookout and save the date for that. But we're putting out an entire policy agenda around that organization to look at how to tackle those zoning issues and change the zoning to align more with these principles that, these kind of recommended actions that are in here, which is, you need to go ahead and have upzoning in these areas where you go ahead and have wastewater and other infrastructure imports. Another question was, with regard to rezoning affordable priority area streamlined development, seems like it would take local zoning to approve a rezoning. Yes. And I think the idea behind it is that hopefully these towns will be looking at this saying, where do we need to change our zoning in the future to allow more by right housing development based on these maps and then other considerations as well. And really where they look at that to do that.
And Ryan, you just led right into my question to David and Don. Since this map has been completed, have you had any sit downs or conversations, meaningful conversations with any of the towns here in the Cape?
Yeah, I can tackle that. So yeah, we've had a number of workshops that we've held that have been open to public officials, and we've had attendance from both sides, both conservation groups as well as affordable housing committees. We've been going around and speaking to every board of selectmen and inviting them to these sessions. We do know that a number of towns have requested the GIS data on the back end of these maps, and we're providing that to them so that they can use it as a part of their housing production plans, as a part of their master plans for their community. So we are starting to see some traction where this has become at least a conversation starter, just to think about, okay, these two groups have already done quite a bit of legwork for us, and we can use this as the starting point to think about our town and dive into the details.
And I would also encourage, our members, David talks about towns requesting GIS data. If our members feel that this is valuable data to have within the MLS as an overlay, we can add map overlays on a lot of things with the GIS data, with any GIS data. So, if you guys reach out to myself or Marcia, anyone else or MLS advisory group and say, hey, this is valuable data, but we can definitely put any kind of GIS overlays layered into the MLS as well for people to, as a map overlay to look at when they need to as well. So
that's interesting.
I was going to say, this is Don. I was going to say that on the other end of that we've had some conversations and presentations with some, but not all of the local private land trusts in town who expressed an interest in the maps, and we're providing the data layers to them as well as to the towns and to the realtor group as well. And what we're telling them is that in the respective towns where they work, that there are a limited number of priority natural resource areas left in each town, and there's a limited amount of resources, financial resources left to acquire those and protect those natural resources. And so it would make sense for the trusts and for the towns to focus their investment efforts and their attention on those priority natural resource areas and try to protect them before they're gone, because when they're gone forever. And to look at those areas and see those areas as their focus, and not necessarily those areas that are purple areas that are in town centers that have infrastructure in place, those sorts of things. And it's a bigger bang for the buck question, really. To utilize those resources to protect the natural resources that we have available in each town, and then for the towns to focus their investments on wastewater infrastructure at the same time, to change zoning in those areas where they have the wastewater infrastructure to encourage more of the housing production to go there instead of in the areas that are going to be harmful to our environment.
Yeah, and I think, with the Cape Cod Mission have identified about 14% of land having not been developed or not protected at this point, at some point you probably will churn through a lot of that to where there's very little left, but there will always be redevelopment opportunities left. Because I think there was a question around, when does development stop? And I'm like, well, I think there will always be redevelopment opportunities no matter what you end up with in the future. All right, well, that's all the questions I see. So David and Don, thank you very much. We'll send it out, but growsmartcapecod.org is where you can find it. And David and Don, I'm sure anyone can reach out to you two for more information as well if they have any follow-up questions or want to talk any further around this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me.
And you know, they can reach you at HAC and at the Association for Preserve Cape Cod, I would assume. And then also, I think, do you have some more sessions coming up in September if people want to deep dive or to revisit your, you know, a presentation elsewhere for you guys?
We do. It's I mean, it's a very similar presentation to this, but we do have, I don't have the dates on me right now, but we can certainly send those out. But we do have 2 workshops that we're doing in the fall.
So if anyone in your office missed this and they want to see it live versus the recorded version will be out, happy to, you know, make sure those dates are available for everyone. So how's the attendance been on the sessions you've had, or do you find those municipal, I mean, this is more a large question, not only presented, but have you found the municipal officials, like not just the staff, but municipal elected leaders, planning board, town select boards engaged in this issue when you present them?
Yeah, you know, I'd say we've had pretty good attendance, 40, 50 people at each session so far. And they've been mainly members of town committees. So members of the public who are engaged in these issues on either side.
And we've had some live in-person sessions with I forget how many, but several of the town select boards as a starting point, as an entry point to the town. And hopefully we'll get some more committees and boards on the schedule in the near future to hear.
So I know a lot of our realtors are engaged. If you're on a board or committee, you know, in towns that you think want this, you know, reach out to these guys as well to have that presentation, and also encourage your select board members who you talk to on a regular basis in your community, if they haven't seen these, heard about these, to get engaged in this. Thank you guys very much for today. Appreciate it. And see everyone later.